Is your capital campaign in an ebb or a flow? I promise you, if you're doing a capital campaign, you will encounter both of those. But we're here to talk to you today about the ebbing portion of a campaign when it feels stuck.
Welcome to All About Capital Campaigns, a podcast that provides fuel for your nonprofit's growth. Each week, Amy Eisenstein and Andrea Kihlstedt, co-founders of Capital Campaign Pro, provide practical tips about raising more money for your nonprofit organization. Here are your hosts, Amy and Andrea.
I'm Andrea Kihlstedt, co-founder of Capital Campaign Pro, and I'm super excited to be here today with my special guest, Dedee Wilner-Nugent, the senior advisor in Capital Campaign Pro, who is in Portland, Oregon, and has worked with some of our most challenging, she's done magic with some of our, in my opinion, most challenging situations. She is just like a magician in helping people figure out how to get what feels like a stuck campaign back on the road. Dedee, welcome. I'm so glad you're here with me today.
Thank you, Andrea. It's a pleasure.
Now, as Dedee and I were preparing for this little podcast, I asked her to write up something saying, well, how do you deal with campaigns that feel stalled? And she came up with something that I love. I'll call it the 4 R's. Right? Don't you love 4 of anything? Right? 4 R's, 4 A's, 4 B's, 4 Z. We have for this particular session, we have 4 R's. And I'm going to feed her one at a time, and she's going to tell you about them and how she uses them. So and it's going to be your job, listener, to see if you can remember these 4 R's by the time we get to the end. That's your little test at the end. So, okay, Dedee, the first R is reframing. What do you mean by that, and how does it work?
For many people, this campaign that they're in the middle of is the first campaign they've ever done. It's hard to understand what's normal, what's not. So when I say reframe, what that means is really normalizing the fact that campaigns don't operate at a steady cadence at all times. As you say, there are ebbs and flows, and they're predictable. So we know that most campaigns start slow, they'll speed up, and then as they wind down, they'll slow down again. That is a typical pacing. And then within that, there can be other, sub shifts in momentum as well. And so just normalizing the fact that campaigns don't operate at a steady shamble, they speed up and slow down is the first piece. And just remind people not to panic and to be prepared and to build in expectations and resilience on the front end so that as these shifts occur, we can be prepared to pivot thoughtfully.
One of the challenges I think that staff members have when a campaign feels stalled is that their board members get nervous or their committee members get nervous, right? Their campaign committee members get nervous. Everybody is sitting and waiting for the next piece of good news, right? Or the next, and they wonder if they've signed on to something that's going to be a dismal flop.
Right.
So you're telling them, or someone's telling them, that this is just a part of campaigns can be hugely helpful. Do you see that as your role as an advisor?
I think that it's the role of the leadership team to set expectations at every stage of the campaign. I think as an advisor, my job is to make sure that the leadership team is doing that work of expectation management and is setting the right expectations. So I bring the experience of many campaigns to that conversation. But ultimately, I think when an organization embraces that culture of expectation management internally, it's going to serve the campaign better than if it's just the advisor championing that.
Right. Right. Sometimes I think also in the reframing process, it's helpful when committee members and staff members understand and look at the entire length of the campaign. at the calendar for the campaign, right? To say,
Exactly.
well, this is a 3-year campaign, and here's where we are, and here's how long we have, right? Which really often in the quiet phase, that's a generous amount of time. So it can accommodate some quiet times, and people forget that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the campaign phases because I think that that's an important tool that, when we're introducing a campaign to a leadership team or a community of helpers who are going to help us fulfill our goal, having a tool that helps people understand where are we in that process, and then keeping that document updated as we're moving through the process so that people have a sense of how long will we be in this phase and what is my role in this phase. Because often, when things are slow, it can be misinterpreted as permission to coast or just a lack of clarity. Things can feel vague. If we don't understand, if I'm not doing something right now, then somebody else is. And my job is just to stay current with what they're doing. And then I understand when my role kicks in and when I need to be activated.
Right. Yeah. Going back to this word reframe, the first of these R's, it strikes me that you're really reframing something from disaster, right, to normal process.
Exactly. Exactly. So we start by framing at the beginning. You can prevent the need to reframe at the outset so that when you get to a slowing, you just are reminding people, oh, we talked about this before and here we are. So kind of previously on Capital Campaign, the adventure, we said this was going to happen and here it's happening now. That's one way to reframe as we're going through the process.
Let's move on to the second R. Now, your second R is to recommit to purpose.
Exactly. And that's really reminding us to center the vision at every step of the way. When we feel, often capital campaigns can feel like we're way down in the weeds, so far away from what inspired us to do them in the first place. People can begin to drag their feet because they don't feel emotionally connected to the why of the campaign any longer because they've been staring at their same assignment sheet week after week for a few months. And we just don't make time to have these conversations about why we're doing this work in the first place. And so bringing a mission moment, a campaign vision moment into every meeting is another way to ensure we're reconnecting to purpose and to people. The other side of that is really recognizing both the purpose of the campaign and the people who make the purpose possible, which is their campaign leaders. So activating a campaign champion who can speak on behalf of the mission and kind of act as a cheerleader for the campaign leadership team can be a useful tool in how to help people reconnect with purpose.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I could imagine, and I've seen this happen, that in a lull time of a campaign, that someone who's given a really large gift, a large early gift, would
Exactly.
step up and talk about why they gave that gift, right? Why it was important. I mean, I worked for a theater company some time ago, and a generous family gave $1 million to kick this campaign off. And periodically they would stand up and say, here's why we did this, and here's why we feel so strongly about this campaign. And we know it ebbs and flows, but we are totally committed. Does that perk people up?
I love that example. It reminds me of another campaign that I've been working on that's past this point now, but they were at a time where the institution's president had been doing the bulk of the heavy lifting to bring in some early lead gifts, and the board hadn't really been engaged very deeply yet. And it was time to then activate the board. And we were able to identify a donor who had made one of those early lead gifts, who was also on the board to then rally everybody else to kind of join the team at that point. So I agree that, when sometimes we're focused on one population and it's time to shift to another population, and new leaders need to step up to help carry water at that point. And that's when this can be a really useful strategy.
Right. Great. So we have reframe, we have recommit to purpose. Now we have one that I particularly like, which is to refocus on small wins. Every campaign has small wins. Talk to me about that.
Sure. So when we first think about, if at the highest level, when we think about capital campaigns, we think we're working toward a goal. But often that goal is 2-3 years into the future. Often it's after a lot of pre-campaign work that will then lead us to beginning to solicit things that will, early lead gifts. There's so many phases, right? So, and it can feel discouraging if you're looking at the whole thing and trying to take it in one bite. And so breaking a campaign down into phases, and then within those phases, breaking down progress into benchmarks that where there can be accountability for them and there can be a sense of momentum as we're knocking down those benchmarks, can help the team avoid feeling overwhelmed and allow people to focus.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting. One of the complicating factors of any capital campaign is that you have many people working on different aspects of the campaign. You have board members working on soliciting the board, for example. You have people working with the architects on the building plans, if it's a building campaign. You have someone working on putting together on the feasibility study, if you're doing a feasibility study. You have people working on prospect research. You have people working on putting together a lead gift committee. You have people working on solidifying the leadership of the campaign, who's going to chair the campaign, right? Many things are going on in these early phases of the campaign. And it's very easy for one piece, people working on one piece, not to know that people are working on other pieces. It's like all this stuff is going on. The development director or the campaign director kind of has their arms wrapped around all of that. But it may not be obvious that somebody needs to be telling everybody about the totality of these little powerful things that are happening.
I love that point, Andrea, because the other half of this piece is of setting short-term achievable goals is then declaring victory when you achieve them. And then to do that, again, being able to share that news with people across the campaign and generate buzz and motivate action. So I think a clear internal communications plan is really beneficial to helping address that feeling of doldrums or disconnect from the campaign. At least a monthly update to every campaign stakeholder would be really helpful. Just celebrating not only outcome successes, but process wins as well. So, maybe not, there were 50 meetings scheduled, and out of those, we had 5 gift conversations and we closed 2 gifts. So you're not just celebrating the 2 gifts or the dollars involved, but you're celebrating all the work that went into that, which encompasses some of those other roles you talked about, where they may not be donor-facing roles, but they're still essential to the momentum of the campaign. And if we can all celebrate each other's work, then we'll all feel lifted and carried along by the journey.
I once worked on a campaign where the development director or the campaign director, I don't remember anymore, but was someone whose kids were involved in sports, right? Very actively involved in sports. And she was very much about teams and about rewards and about, putting together structures so that when things happened, everybody felt like they were part of that process. She would have little gatherings where she would give awards, right, for the team that accomplished the most. And to me, I mean, I wasn't involved with my kids in sports. It's not a culture I know or understand well. And I was kind of put off by it until I saw how well it worked. The people were really delighted to be part of that. They were delighted to be part of a winning team. They were made to feel part of a winning team by not necessarily seeing yet that the dollars were so high, but by seeing how much was going on. And there was that filled this void of the fact that it takes time for these dollars to come in.
Absolutely.
Right?
And what I love about what you're saying is the idea of joyfulness as food for campaign momentum, right? And so if we can center joyfulness in every campaign conversation and notice our successes together as a community along the way, we're going to have more fun. And if we're having fun, we're going to be more motivated to do the work.
Yeah. We haven't talked something about a sort of a big concept here, which is that the way capital campaigns work is that through the whole first maybe year and a half, sometimes 2 years, most organizations are soliciting maybe 20 or 30 gifts in hopes of bringing in 15 or 20 gifts, but big gifts. Right now, collectively, those gifts may make up 70, 80% of the campaign goal. So the dollar goal is big. But the number of gifts that come in during that part of the campaign is relatively small, which actually accounts for this sense of ebb and flow, right? When you hear that a big gift has come in, everybody's excited. And then you go for 3 months and nothing comes in, or 4 months, or 5 months, because these big gifts all take time. And that's the ebbing part, right? That's why all campaigns go through this sense of, well, nothing's happening, no money's coming in. Are we or do we have a problem? It's the structure of a campaign that sets it up that way. And what we're talking about here, what Dedee has outlined for us, are ways to mitigate that very natural sort of vacuum between these big gifts. Really, I sort of hadn't thought about it that way before, but I think that's often what happens.
I think that's absolutely right. I often think of a campaign momentum in terms of a sine wave. If you're a visual thinker, kind of a big upside down a rainbow, right? Kind of with flat sides. And the idea is that that quiet phase, that early insider lead gift phase, is the slowest part of the campaign. Absolutely. And then it speeds up as we move into mid-level gifts. And then as we're wrapping the campaign and we're looking for the last few gifts, it can slow down again. So absolutely. But if we think about the campaign not merely as a project of gift collection, but we think of it as a project of relationship development, then there's a lot more there during the quiet phase, and that's something that I often talk to my organizations that I'm working on campaigns with about, is having our methodology really be rigorous about the relational steps of moving a donor toward a gift conversation, so that we're counting all of those steps as well as the gift in our celebrations. So, for example, have we talked to every one of our top prospects recently, not about the campaign, but just to reaffirm, the relationship with their primary contact, that bilateral relationship? And then have we engaged that donor in a multilateral context where we're introducing them to other members of our leadership team and being current in those relationships? And then, have we introduced the campaign concept to that donor and their reaction been? And, have we had a chance to kind of consider that reaction and plan a strategy? And then finally, are we ready to make an ask for a gift? And how did that go? So there's a lot of steps that we can focus on and achieve victory before that gift during those long months, rather than just thinking somebody's doing something and it's taking a long time.
Or maybe nobody's doing anything and nothing's happening.
Exactly.
That's the biggest worry, right?
Which goes into my fourth
Yes.
recommendation.
Fourth R.
Yeah, exactly, which is reassess.
Yes. And what is that and when does that happen?
So if you're doing these other things and the campaign still feels like it's not progressing, relationships with donors are not moving intentionally and predictably toward a place where a solicitation is possible, or a solicitation has been made and it's sort of gone nowhere, and you're not able to connect with a donor to complete that conversation. If things like that are happening, or there's tensions within the team, or possibly a shortage of capacity on either the volunteer or the staff side to do the work, then that's time for a reassessment. Reviewing the prospect list and refreshing it. If some donors are just not moving, maybe they aren't going to give us the gift that we're trying to secure from them, or maybe it's going to take longer than we thought. And we have the bandwidth to then pivot some of our energy while that's on the back burner cooking slowly to move some other donors on our depth chart up to the top of the priority list and get some short-term wins with lower level gifts while we're waiting for that other gift to come to fruition. Or if we're having staff capacity issues or volunteer capacity issues, we can reevaluate that, maybe do some restructuring and then go back out and try again with some new systems in place.
Dedee, these are wonderful strategies. And I know you a magician with your advising clients. How do you think about using them? Do you go through one at a time with them? How do you use these strategies with your clients?
It's not a one size fits all situation. I think that in general, introducing these concepts at the very beginning of a working relationship can be really helpful. So if you're a campaign leader and you're orienting your volunteers or your board or your staff team to a campaign, introducing the concept of campaign momentum as a thing at the very beginning of your work, setting those expectations, that's number one on our list of things. I think it's always good to start with number one, frame and then reframe as we go along, connect the dots between what we said 6 months ago and where we're at today, all the way along the process. I think number 4 is also important and can happen at the beginning and then throughout the campaign, which is that making sure we have the right capacity and systems for managing people in place, and that our donor list is the right list, and that we have them prioritized in the right order. Those things, I think, do it at the beginning and throughout the campaign in a regular cadence. The second and third priorities, engaging emotionally with the campaign vision and having a cheerleader or setting short-term achievable goals, those, I think, are things that are done constantly. And so they happen throughout the process. 1 and 4 are done episodically as needed, and 2 and 3 are done basically all the time. Every time you have a meeting, you should be thinking about 2 and 3.
Right. It's so helpful to think these things through. Let me pause just for a minute and talk to our listeners. If thinking about these things, these constructive ways to keep your campaign going and feeling fresh seems really appealing to you, you might want to think about working with a campaign advisor. And if you go to capitalcampaignpro.com, you can actually sign up on the homepage for a strategy session to find out what that would look like and how we might work with you. Or while you're there, you can look under the resources tab. We have a host of free resources, campaign plans, the ultimate guide to capital campaigns, and other material. So by all means, go to our website, take a look, click the button to sign up for a strategy session, or just take a look at some of the free material, and maybe it will help you as you plan for your campaign. Now, Dedee, let's finish up sort of with this little quiz. I promised a quiz, right?
You did.
To our listeners. Do you think they remember what these 4 R's are? Shall we refresh their memories?
Oh, let's do it.
Okay. What's the first one?
The first is reframe, and that is to normalize the experience of the fact that campaigns have a momentum that is not consistent throughout. It ebbs and flows.
Great. I love it. And the second one?
Is to reconnect with purpose and people. So reminding ourselves about why we're doing this, the campaign vision, what is the point of all of this, and why do we care? And then, embodying that in the form of a champion and empowering that person to help us, but remind everybody of what's important.
The third one
is to refocus on short-term achievable goals for the week or the month, and to celebrate progress as we go.
And finally, the fourth one?
To reassess when other strategies aren't working, revisit the prospect list, reprioritize leads, and identify who needs a new approach.
4 approaches that you can use if and when, and I promise you it will happen, your campaign feels stalled.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Thank you so much, Dedee. That was so helpful. So helpful for me, actually, to get some clarity about the subject. And it comes up again and again. So I think it will be helpful to our listeners.
Hooray. I hope so.
I so appreciate your being with me today.
Thanks for joining Amy and Andrea for today's All About Capital Campaigns. To learn more about them and their work together, visit capitalcampaignpro.com, where you'll find all the help you'll need for your campaign. And please follow, rate, and review us on your favorite podcasting platform. Thank you.